Now, it's hard to believe that the Star Wars special editions came out over 27 years ago, that there are, no doubt, a lot of fans, younger fans, who have probably never seen them, who might not even know or realize that Jabba was never in the original version of A New Hope. He's mentioned, of course, and he was supposed to be in there, but that he was added later with CGI, or that once upon a time, Han Solo not only shot Greedo first, but he was the only one to shoot. But what's maybe even harder for me personally to believe, and I actually hadn't realized this until a conversation with someone recently, and I thank that person for the revelation and pointing me to where I could find them, but I hadn't seen the original versions of the original trilogy since the special editions came out. Since I last watched my VHS copies of them many, many years ago now, ones that I have long since lost somewhere along the way of this thing called life. Not to mention I haven't owned a VHS player in about 27 years either. Also, to go along with this, I have been meaning to, and been asked a few times, to go back and review the original trilogy. I've never done that on this channel in all my years now, in large part because, well, it's kind of hard for me to do that in any kind of objective way, because I have always just known Star Wars. I don't remember life before it or without it. I don't recall the first time I saw A New Hope or Empire Strikes Back. I do remember seeing Return of the Jedi for the first time. I saw that in a theater when I was 5, but the other ones are just there, always have been. So it's kind of hard to look at them with any sort of unbiased eye when they are as much a part of me as anything else. Not to mention, I feel like it's impossible to remove all the other Star Wars information or lore from my mind and to see them as their own thing entirely, or to see them as they were then when they were first released. I mean, back in 1977 when people watched Star Wars for the first time, long before people ever referred to it as A New Hope, it was always just Star Wars, Empire, and Jedi when I was young. But when Darth Vader appeared on screen for the very first time, people knew absolutely nothing about him. But now when I rewatch it today, I know his whole story. I know he was once Anakin Skywalker, that he's going to be Luke's father, and Leia's too, and how he fell from grace. I know that whole story. I know all of it. But anyway, I figured if I was finally going to do a review of the original trilogy, it should be of the original version, starting of course with just Star Wars, and I'll do the other ones in time, of course. Though honestly here, I don't know that this will be much of a review, as it will be me talking about the experience of rewatching the original version and rambling a bit, no doubt, and maybe making a few observations and sure some comparisons to the special editions. And mainly, maybe talking about some of my feelings while watching it and thoughts about it, and trying to figure how I think it did stand alone back in the day when it was the only thing Star Wars at all. And so, first of all here, I do have to say it was almost a little surreal watching this version again, which as I said, I hadn't seen in roughly 27 years, but that I had seen so many times when I was a kid. I'd hesitate to even take a guess at how many times I watched these films when I was young. Even if, I have to admit, A New Hope was my least favorite and least watched of the original 3 back then. I always enjoyed watching Empire and Jedi more when I was young, with Jedi being my favorite of the Star Wars films, in large part because, yeah, I do remember seeing it for the first time, and it's one of my earliest and most vivid memories. So yeah, it was a little surreal watching this again, and though, like I said, I have so much more context now. For example, the last time I saw this version, the prequels had not come out yet, but I could recall being a kid and watching this and wondering about so many things, and just wanting more Star Wars. I could remember when the original trilogy was the only thing Star Wars we had, or that I really knew about, at least, outside of things like the Ewoks movies, which I saw and I enjoyed as a kid, and the Ewoks and Droids cartoons. That was the extent of my Star Wars knowledge until reading Heir to the Empire in 1991, and then starting my very long and happy journey into the EU. Anyway, not only was it, again, a little surreal to, in a sense, go back to being a kid again and watching this movie that I had seen so many times then, and watched while sitting like 3 feet from the television screen, but there was a little sadness that I felt too, because back when I watched it then, when I was a kid, I just had this completely unabashed love for Star Wars. I in no way watched it with any sort of critical eye then. It just was what it was, and that was that. And though I still very much love Star Wars today, maybe not exactly fully what it is today or all the content, but I do kind of miss just not, like I was saying, looking at it critically and instead just basking in it, if you will, just enjoying it for what it is. As I've said before, I do understand the fans who still want to feel that way when they watch Star Wars today, who want to feel maybe like kids again, who just want to love everything Star Wars and never ever want to be critical of it in any way. Because I used to be that type of fan myself until sometime during the prequels, though I had read some EU books and comics before that, which maybe weren't the greatest things ever, but since they were part of Star Wars, I loved them anyway. But it was during the prequels at some point that I acknowledged to myself that, well, maybe these films aren't exactly perfect. I still enjoyed the hell out of them, don't get me wrong, I love the prequels, but yeah, they maybe had some issues. But I'm getting off topic here, and yeah, in a way, there was some sadness watching this version of the film again that was such a huge part of my childhood, and remembering just how much I loved Star Wars back then. Not that, again, I don't love it today, but I miss when I just loved Star Wars and wasn't in any way judgmental or critical of it, and you may want to say that's my fault for choosing to be critical now, but I don't think it's my job to find ways to enjoy what they're putting out these days. It is their job to make good content and to make me enjoy it. The more slack I or we fans cut them, the more we say we love everything and never be critical, well, the more they're going to just give us anything. But moving on, something else that I hadn't really realized or remembered were just how many changes were made to the first movie. Just little things here and there that were added or slightly altered from the original version that when I saw them, or should I say when I maybe didn't see them, I literally said to myself, oh, I had forgotten that wasn't actually in there originally. And they go along with, of course, the bigger changes made, some of which I mentioned earlier, like the CGI version of Jabba being added or added to a deleted scene and then being put back into the film, as well as things like Han no longer shooting first, or things like the Battle of Yavin at the end of the film, which pretty much got entirely reworked for the special edition, at least all the dogfights and trench run parts, all the ship parts. Even though, I gotta say, for a now nearly 50-year-old movie, or 50-year-old special effects, it still looked extremely impressive in its original form. Especially when you realize there was zero CGI used, of course. But this was all done with miniatures and pyrotechnics, basically. And though I have no issue with the battle in the special edition, the changes made, I think it's fine. I think seeing this version again, that I prefer this version, actually. Which isn't to say I don't like or agree with any of the changes made to the film. A lot of them are good to great and simply they clean up some shots or add a little bit more, shall we say, ambiance to a shot or a setting, like all the little extra stuff added to Mos Eisley. I think that is all fine and good, and I kind of missed it not being in here, to be completely honest. I kind of think it just adds a little something. It doesn't take away too much not being there, but it does actually add a little something that I think gives a little flavor or, again, ambiance to these shots. I even think, not to get too far ahead of myself, but the changes made to Cloud City in Empire, how it's more opened up and looks and feels more like a Cloud City, I think they're excellent. It's going to be strange seeing how it originally looked when I rewatch that movie here soon. Now, as for the movie itself, trying to somehow watch it or judge it out of the context of everything I know, which, yeah, is kind of next to impossible, but trying to look at it through the lens of a first-timer who has no other Star Wars knowledge or information, I think what was most, I don't want to say surprising because I had realized this before, but it is kind of surprising just how simple and straightforward of a story it really is. How little information you're given for any of it, really. I mean, sure, there's some exposition that explains things. Obi-Wan explaining the Force to Luke, the Imperial meeting on the Death Star gives us quite a bit of context for what's going on in the galaxy, and we can't forget that opening crawl that does a great job of just setting the stage for all of it. But other things that I think we get very wrapped up with in today's world when it comes to judging or reviewing movies, for better or worse, things like villain motivation and all that, well, you get nothing. Darth Vader is a blank slate in this film, a very intimidating and frightening blank slate, but a blank one nonetheless. But that is fine. It works mainly because of his on-screen presence and just the things he does or the way he does them. Another thing I don't think I noticed just at this time, I certainly didn't, but instead really thought about while I was watching it this time, while watching how it originally was back in the day, how people initially saw it back in 1977 when it first came out, is that the script does not make this movie great. Instead, it was a culmination of so many other things done amazingly well that really made this something special. Things like the special effects, which were mind-blowing for 1977, or, of course, the score from John Williams. I have said many times before that if you take that away, if you give this film the type of score that a lot of sci-fi had back in the day, I don't think we're all here talking about Star Wars today. And no, I'm not saying that the script was bad or anything. I'm not trying to knock George Lucas, anything but. I mean, his vision made this all happen in the first place, and he gets credit for coming up with the Jedi and the Force, borrowing from different religions and influences to create it. But what made this movie truly special, rather ironically, considering how much I talk about spectacle versus substance, which isn't to say this film lacks substance or meaning, far from it. It is a great coming-of-age story. It is a great story about good versus evil, right versus wrong. And it is, thanks to the characters, I think, something we can really relate to. I think one of the reasons the film does work so well outside of the spectacle is the characters feel very real. They feel like they have earthly or real problems that we might have, and so we relate to them much easier. Han Solo feels like a character not out of a galaxy far, far away, but a jerk you could meet at your local bar. Though hopefully he wouldn't just shoot first if you have a disagreement with him. But anyway, all of those things certainly contributed. Again, I'm not trying to knock the script, I'm just saying that it really wasn't anything all that different or special. It is the hero's journey in space. It is a space opera. But it was the way it was all put together. It was the experience it gave you watching it in the theater or watching it at home almost 50 years later that could make you feel like a kid again, that made you feel something. It is the way it ignites your imagination and just takes you on a fun, crazy ride across an unknown galaxy. That's what made this movie so special, I think. And I would say it was actually The Empire Strikes Back that really gave weight to Star Wars itself. But let's not get ahead of ourselves here. Let's wait before we get into all that until after I have rewatched the original version once more. Well, that's all I got for you this time. Now it's your turn to take to the comments below and tell me if you've seen the original version of Star Wars lately, or maybe if you've never seen it, if you're maybe a younger fan, and how you think it compares to the special edition, or just what you think of it in general, what you think made it such a smash success that we're here almost 50 years later still talking about it. Whatever the case may be, though, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.